My name is Celie, and I am a Gwent streamer on Twitch. You might know me from there. If not, then hi, nice to meet you. Really happy to be here. And the goal for today is to make a Gwent video deck guide for you guys. I hope you will enjoy it. I've been meaning to make some YouTube videos for a long time, so I'm very excited to be here and finally be able to do that. My socials will be down below. You can follow me on there, see what else I'm up to. But yeah, let's just have a look at the cards in this deck. Alright guys, so we are in the deck builder currently, and as you can see, we're going to look through a elf deck. This is the deck that I used to climb to pro rank with. I built it quite fast. I do think there are other options that you can choose for this, and we will definitely discuss it later. Because as you can see, just with a quick glance here, we do have a lot of expensive golds. And to be able to play these expensive golds, that means we also have these kind of bad 4 provision cards here. Like the Blue Mountain Elite right now, I'm not a huge fan of. As well as we have double Saboteur and dual Lieutenant Bomber. They're decent value. The Saboteurs can be good for carryover. Other than that, it's definitely not ideal to be playing so many 4 provision bronzes. So I do have some other recommendations for you if you want to try them out, swap some cards out here. But I just like these the gold cards that we have in this deck. They feel very effective, and therefore I wanted to include all of them. And it's a little bit stacked in terms of those golds being in there. I'll walk you through them, kind of explain why they're there, how to play this deck, and we'll look a little bit at the bronzes and see what we can upgrade or change to have the bronze score be slightly different. The leader we've chosen is the Deadeye Ambush, so it spawns Elven Deadeyes in an allied row, and it has 3 charges. So this is a really flexible leader in an elf deck. The Elven Deadeyes are the token that is doomed, and it's a 3 power elf, basically. So it works in synergy with cards like Yavin, as well as cards like the Great Oak. And it is definitely very flexible to kind of use to push your opponent potentially, or have a really explosive short round 3, which is something I do like about this deck. It also synergizes quite nicely with Isengrim. You have 3 extra elves that Isengrim potentially will boost for you. But let's look at the other golds in the deck. We have Feign Death, again the upgraded scenario, which I was curious to explore. And the Aneromancy. Now, Aneromancy is an echo card that got introduced quite recently. The reason for why we have Aneromancy here is it can tutor something like Novigradian Justice or our scenario. Now, Call of the Forest is another option that you can run in elves, but you cannot find your special with that or the scenario card. So therefore, Aneromancy is quite pricey. It's 13 provisions, but it does feel really good when you can tutor out your Novigradian Justice or your Feign Death. And then the other card we have is the Great Oak. And the Great Oak definitely acts as a little bit of a point slam finisher in this deck. You can use it to remove engines potentially. You can have great flexibility with your leader. You spawn your Deadeye, your Elven Deadeyes, and then you can oak something pretty fast, remove an engine. The main thing with this deck is we're not running any tall removal. We have Ernaciel. She's a really great card. You usually want to save her for quite late. She can be really good on the melee row, as you have so many Elven Deadeyes that it might actually be worth it to play her for some damage. She's also good for a short round where you play her on ranged row. She quickly spawns 2 Elven Deadeyes in the same row, which again helps with Yavin or Oak, for example. So you have to do a little bit of maths there and kind of count, is it worth it to play her on melee or on the ranged row? Now, Novigradian Justice is a card that doesn't necessarily synergize with elves. However, I've included this card just because it feels too good not to play. With your Novigradian Justice, you can tutor out your Mahakam Volunteers, for example. And we do have an extra target if we brick our Novigradian Justice, which means we don't have, we draw the Mahakam Volunteers in our hands. We have an extra target for that, which is minor. They don't quite synergize with the elves, especially not the scenario, as the scenario spawns the Vernaciel's Commando. Now, if we look at Vernosiel's commando, if you control only elf units, it will boost itself by 1 unless you already have Vernosiel on the board. And Vernosiel is typically a card that you want to play quite late in a round. So most likely you're not going to have her on the board when you play your commando. And the commando needs to come out early to get as much value as possible as well. So the dwarves are quite anti-synergistic with this card. However, with the help of Necromancy, you can hopefully draw your justice before and thin out your cards with the help of the volunteers so that you can find your good golds later on, but also offer great tempo when you want to push your opponent in round 1, for example, or when you're getting bled by your opponent. You can help defend the bleed by tutoring out these guys. It's just a really big tempo swing and it helps thin your deck. So as long as you kind of aim to play those before you play your scenario, or in a round where you don't play your scenario card, they work really well. And I just feel it's too good not to include in this because the value is just so great. And then another great gold that we have is Elias. He's again just a good value card, good tempo. He spawns more elves for your Isengrim, for your Yevon, helps with the oak. So he definitely works well in this deck. Then we have Teruviel. She punishes anything that goes really wide. So for example, swarm decks, or anything that row stacks really, you can usually use her on the melee for pretty decent value, 8 for 8, or you use her on the ranged row and potentially get even more value from her. So she's just a solid gold to have here. Now we have Ailuren that we're gonna look at a little bit. So she basically jumps out of your deck when you have 5 elves on the board or more. She will automatically jump on to the melee row as she gets summoned. She can be nice to have in round 3. You can also thin your deck a little bit before that. If you really want to push your opponent, it's not that bad if she comes out before round 3 when you play a lot of your elves. But yeah, if you can get her out of the deck and potentially win a round on even, I don't think it's bad to let her come out of the deck earlier than round 3. Now, Isengrim is just a pretty straightforward card, and he profits off having as many elves on the board as possible. Now, let's move on to our bronze core. We only have elves here, as well as the miner, this one guy that we pretty much want to try and mulligan all the time. He's decent if we do end up with him in our hand, but we would like to play him in a round where we don't play the scenario or have Vernosiel's commando on the board. Other cards is Redhead Vanguard. I've included just one. It's 5 provisions, so it's a little bit more expensive than all of these 4 provision cards that we have here. But he's just pretty good value. He can sometimes play for a 9 for 5, sometimes less, but typically he will always be a 6 and more. The Degruns are here for movement. You can move your allied units to your own row to make your row wider with your elves, which can sometimes be alright. And you can avoid weather type effects as well with this card. Or you can play it offensively, meaning you move your opponent's units. And for example, against Skellige, the Dragoons will definitely find value, and potentially also Northern Mount. The Right-Hand Officer is interesting. It got a little bit of an update. It's bonded, so you can use both of these abilities when you play him, or when you have 2 of these on the board. So you have to have one on the board, and when you play the other, the bonded ability will trigger and it will play for a 7, and the first one will play for a 5. So it's pretty decent value for these 2. Bowmans are straightforward. They're just 6/4s, hopefully, that you will play. The card I'm not a huge fan of is the Blue Mountain Elite because it's quite situational. So we'll try to mulligan her as well, but she is a 6/4 if we manage to get her condition fulfilled. Now the Saboteurs are pretty good for a dry pass. So meaning if you don't expect your opponent to bleed you, you can just drop a Redhead Saboteur, or if you're playing against something and you know you're not going to win the round, for example round 1 or round 2, you can just drop one of these and hopefully boost some of the golds that you might want to use in round 3. And the Doblathana Bombers kind of do the same thing. They're just a 6/4 solid value card that works well with your Elias. So yeah, those are basically the cards in this deck. And now let's talk a little bit about the strategy behind this and how you want to play it. if you can, you want to push round 1 and usually win it. This deck is really great in a short round 3 if you can save your scenario. Cards like Oak, Renocial, really any of these golds work pretty well in a short round except for Eastern Grim and such. But yeah, if you can save your leader as well as some of these really powerful golds, you definitely have a pretty good strategy. So you try to push round 1 a little bit, potentially win it, and then push round 2. It depends on what your opponent is playing. If you think your opponent is playing something tall, for example, we don't have that much tall removal, so that is something we want to get out. Let's say Syndicate, who plays a lot of engines, potentially something like Passiflora, and they play very tall. That is something that we definitely want to bleed in round 2, meaning we will continue playing in round 2 and push our opponent to play some of their own important cards, hopefully. And then we can save some of our explosive cards for round 3, like Feign Death, Renocial, have a short round 3 that we potentially will try to win. That is one strategy that we can do, and considering that we lack tall removal, that is definitely something we will opt in doing as well. If you go into a long round with this deck, you have to be a little bit careful because you can brick your own rows, meaning you spawn too many units. If your scenario lives, you have your Elias, you have your leader, you definitely have to be careful, especially if you're playing against factions like Nilfgaard or Skellige, Patricidal Fury. Patricidal Fury, your opponent can summon all of those 1-point sirens on your side of the board, meaning you can't really play any of your cards, so you have to be really careful that you avoid that situation against that type of deck. And same with Nilfgaard, they usually like to play spies and units on your side of the board, which might disrupt your strategy and block things like your Oak or your Yavin, things like that. What you need to do as a player is evaluate whether you think your opponent is going to play something tall that you cannot remove, that you feel like you have to bleed. For example, Northern Realms would be one of those decks that you typically want to bleed, just because your short round will be better than theirs, and they have more engines that will outpoint you in a long round 3. So that would be one of those decks that you want to bleed, as well as Syndicate with the Passiflora. Now, things like Nilfgaard, their scenario, the poison scenario, is not so strong against elves because we play really low value cards, so we're not playing anything too tall. And then monsters, I think the deck that you see the most right now is probably something like Overwhelming Hunger. And that's definitely something that you want to avoid a little bit going into a long round with that or against that, as you might get outpowered by something like Werecat. So you might want to try and bleed the Werecat out, bleed the scenario out. They often run Haunt, which is a card that you kind of need to get out before going into round 3. But monsters does have a pretty strong short round as well, depending on what they draw and how they play. So that can be a difficult matchup, as well as Skellige potentially, I would say. Okay, so we're about to head into our first game. I have no idea what we're going to be playing against. Jackpot. That is definitely interesting. Now that the new patch has hit, there's all kinds of stuff, experimental stuff going on. So yeah, that is definitely interesting. Seeing people try out some fun combos. So let's see how it works with Jackpot. I'm not too sure about what this deck would be playing, but yeah, we'll start by mulliganing some of our bronzes. We don't need the miner. And I don't like having the Saboteur in our hand in round 1 as well. Now we are on red coin here, so we potentially have the option of really out-tempoing our opponent. Let's see what they play, how fast they play, and yeah. But let's mulligan the Saboteur. He's great for a dry pass in round 2 rather than round 1. We get our little bronze bonded combo there with the redhead officers, as well as we have our justice for a pretty good amount of points here. An Aeromancy is also here. I would not mind committing an Elias. It really depends on what our opponent's going to be playing here, because I am not so sure. what Jackpot is going to be all about. I think movement is definitely quite valuable. And like I mentioned before, Syndicate is just known to be playing all of these engines, so I do feel like this is something we potentially want to bleed out. But I think we might just start with our Novigrad Injustice here. It's just proactive, it's tempo, but it thins our deck as well for further rounds. Like I mentioned before, we don't want to play Justice or any Dwars while we play the scenario. So let's just make sure of that. And now these bombers are slightly awkward if our opponent's not going to be playing any units, but you know, we still have some range with our cards here, so we'll see. We'll see. So this is a melee locked card. Our opponent did not use any of the coins yet. I do think there's going to be other spenders, other ways for our opponent to spend their coins, but I still think we might move this. It just seems like a pretty nice play. We disable that engine. Yep. Let's do that for now. See what happens next. I think our plan going forward is just playing a couple of our Scourge Bronzes, maybe even thinning out the Aileron here to just add a little bit of pressure to the opponent. Alright.
What can I say?
We see this Sol come out, and this is one of those engines that we can't really interact too much with this deck, as we are only playing not really any taunt removal here, so that's not happening. We're not getting rid of that Sol. It's probably going to get a really good amount of points for our opponent here. We can definitely focus on threatening it a little bit, potentially removing it. But we'll see. We'll see. We have to remember that our opponent has 9 coins. That is quite a lot, considering there is a spender like a Sea Jackal. Philippa is a card that Syndicate likes using. So definitely our opponent has a lot of range here. We have to be a little bit careful that we don't get outpointed either. But, you know, we'll see, we'll see. As long as we can keep up here and just prolong the round a little bit, I think we're at a pretty good spot. Okay, so we see a crime card come down there from our opponent. That is fine. We have to remember this Sol is going to keep on ticking, so that is definitely interesting. I think we just play one of our bombers. It did hit the shield here, which is, you know, not ideal. We would have rather just hit the Sol, but that is fine. So even if our opponent passes here, I don't think he will. We can still be ahead, so we don't have to worry too much about that. So our opponent's definitely over profiting here. It looks like they don't have a spender, because I think otherwise they would use something to spend with. Now they're moving the Freak Show. So it does seem like this is the only spender that our opponent really has. I'm thinking if we move it back, it might be very troublesome for our opponents. This Neuromancy could be used to play something like Isengrim, something a little bit more valuable, as we don't know what it is. But since he spent so many coins just to get that Straits of Spala movement, I think we're actually fine to tutor out our own movement again. We'll see. I think we just go for the second Dragoon that we have to move this back, disable the coin spending situation. Our opponent has 3 coins, so that means Sol will only boost by 1, meaning we're still ahead and we don't really have to use our leader here. So let's just pass and keep it at that. Yeah.
3, 2, 1, go!
Interesting. It does seem like our opponent has an engine here. Let's just use a Riot Officer, I think, to just disable this spender too.
Riot!
And now that our opponent has Sword 6, this Sol will boost by 2. So we have to keep this Sol in mind, definitely. But we don't have to use leader. We don't have to get the Aileron out just yet. We can still play our bronzes here and still potentially win on even. It really depends on what our opponent is going to do. He uses Caleb, which to me indicates he does have, he potentially has Graydon in this deck. Caleb's definitely, it's a little bit of a bounty package here, which is quite curious. I don't think I've seen this before. There might be a witch hunter, something like that. Now we could eliminate this bounty if we destroy this dragoon with our Elias. It might be worth doing. I think we actually do it. And again, this Saul, we do get the Aileron out here, so we don't have to use Leader, and the Saul isn't alone going to be able to keep up, as we're 10 points ahead here, so. Now our opponent seems to be spending quite some decent cards here. I think he might even be going for a Graydon right now. Yep, the Graydon comes down on that card, and the Saul will be getting 2 coins per turn. So yeah, we can definitely consider playing more bronzes here. This will play for a 7 point, which is quite decent. This will tick for another 2, so we could use a later charge on bronze and still kind of win this round. I'm not opposed to doing that, so let's just utilize the bonded ability here, I think. And yeah, I think we do exactly that. Now, yeah, this will tick by 2. So, I think we might just be fine using a bronze after this if our opponent passes. So we win the round. I don't think we spent too much, and I think that is definitely good. Now, bleeding is the other question. I'm still very confused about what this deck actually is, whether it runs Passiflora or not. I don't think so. So yeah, we have a pretty good, pretty decent hand here. We could go like play our scenario, play our Terubial, play our Vernociel, use our leader charges, and just finish it up with an Oak. Definitely, if our opponents can catch up with that, however, it's not going to be great. Our opponent might also have a Heatwave, if I'm not mistaken. So far, it looks like it's a Devotion. No, it's not a Devotion list, since they play the Strays of Swala. So, there might definitely be a Heatwave in here. So that is a little bit concerning. We'll see what we do. Let's see if this gets Heatwaved or not. That is currently the only artifact in the game, artifact removal, sorry, in the game, along with Shoop Hunter. So we have pretty good chances of this not getting removed, but I guess we'll find out. Okay, our scenario sticks, which is definitely nice for us. And I think we're just going to go with that Vernociel. It's a pretty good tempo play. I don't see why not. The next chapter of our scenario will be the Waylay. So we really want our opponent to have a 3-point card that we can death blow here. So we might even play this Oak potentially to do that. And we could get rid of the Sea Jekyll, for example. Now that means our Vernociel's Commando is not going to stick just yet, but yeah, I don't mind that actually. If we really want to go all in here, which I'm not super opposed to, we can use leader charges and just get the maximum amount of Oak value that we can get here. So we use one more leader charge, and then we go ahead and just remove the Sea Jekyll and keep it at that. This is why this deck has a very explosive short round. So even if you're a card down potentially after bleeding, let's say we would have bled, gone a card down.
My lads will make sure of that.
Okay. So our opponent has this Bender on board right now. I still like using to reveal and waylay to trigger the last chapter of the scenario. It's just good value in general here. Now the question is, will we use all of our leader charges to just try and potentially push? Okay, yeah. So I guess this game kind of demonstrates not just only this deck, but in elves with the scenario does have a lot of power in a short round. And yeah, so I think I'm not sure what this deck our opponent was playing was all about. It might be they didn't draw everything they needed to at all, so I don't really know what that deck was all about, what the idea behind it was. But you can see that being on red coin can be utilized with cards like Novigradian Justice, and then you go into a short round. So in that short round, it's a little bit risky to go all in there, because if our opponent has the option to survive that, we might be in trouble in a short round 3 where we basically have spent all of our resources. So, you know, sometimes you gotta risk it for the biscuit though. So I think the bleed definitely paid off just because we were able to trigger that scenario and utilize that as it wasn't removed. So we were testing the waters a little bit there. If our artifacts would have got removed, that would have been a little bit unfortunate, but yeah. So let's jump into another game and see what happens against something else. All right, we're jumping into another game. I don't know what this could be against. Okay, this is a pretty popular deck on the ladder. It really depends a little bit on how our opponent is going to be playing this. We do have red coin, which is quite nice, so we don't have to be just as scared about our opponent bleeding us, potentially. Or not bleeding, but kind of overpowering us with their tempo cards in round 1. What we're gonna start by doing, I think, is just removing Aileron, as well as the Volunteer or the Miner, potentially. It really depends on what we get. I think we mulligan the Volunteer here. Okay. This is quite an interesting hand. We don't have either a Neuromancy or Novigradian Justice, so these cards are a little bit problematic, so to speak, right now. But it's okay. Again, we don't have to worry too much about winning this round. We're on red coin, so that means we kind of play reactively in comparison to our opponent, who has to play a little bit more proactively. So we can afford to play slightly slow. However, I'm a little bit scared about the long round against Overwhelming Hunger if we can't get something like Werecats and Haunt out before that. So this will be definitely interesting to see. Another thing to keep in mind in this matchup is playing something like, let's play the Saboteur for carryover first. Let's put it on the Elias. But yeah, cards to keep in mind is potentially Maruna. Maruna yoinks, steals a 4-power unit from your side of the board. So something like the Miner is something we don't want to get stolen later on. I think we can play this Miner now, because I think we're quite happy if our opponents would choose to go Maruna and leader charge here. So it's a sacrifice we can afford to kind of make in round 1 if our opponent would choose to do that. Our opponent seems to just choose thinning here by playing the Follets. I don't want to play my Volunteers because I won't have a target for our Justice later on. So I will just go ahead and play this Double Thunder Bomber. It's not a great card. We can just buff this to a 5. Not a great card. It doesn't seem like we're able to outpoint our opponents in this round. So I think we just take it slow and play our bronzes. We'll leave it at that. See what happens in a long round. Although I don't really like that too much.
This one's Werecat dragged in.
I'm still trying to trade a good card with my opponent. See if they would trade something good with us. It's not anything good, it's just a bronze. I think we have to kind of pass here. It does look like that. I'm definitely worried about the long round, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe our opponent will bleed us, and we have the option to out-tempo them with our own Novigradian Gradient Justice, for example. Anything with a lot of points. But yeah, this is typically, I think, something you would like to win round 1. But we shall see how it will work out. Now, we see that we have both the volunteers in our hands, so we definitely want to mulligan those. We have a nice dry pass card in case our opponent does not decide to push us here and bleed us deeply into this round. But they might. If they have a really good hand, I think Overwhelming Hunger definitely has potential to really outpoint us here. So we'll just have to see how that goes. It does play the Larva. To me, that is indicating they will further play into this round. I think we just start with this carryover once again and put it on this Elias. Potentially we can save that for a short round. That would be a great power swing. If we do end up committing something like Scenario or Justice here. We'll see. This Blue Mountain Elite, again being a conditional card, is not great having in your hand here. So, yeah. We'll see if our opponent does indeed bleed us here. We can try to put power on the board with the Novigradian Justice, but again, we have to make sure we play this. We get the value from the Blue Mountain Elite, so we have to use it if our opponent makes it possible for us, for example, plays on the ranged row, because we don't want it to just sit there as a 3-point bronze. That would feel pretty bad. The opponent plays a Werecat here. Very interesting. That is definitely interesting. It is not going to get a great amount of value, I think. Depending a little bit on how we play. We could... We could potentially move it with our Dragoon to a row that does not have any units yet. But that means we might break our Blue Mountain Elite later. I think we'll still move it for now. If our opponent decides to play front row here, then we might be able to play something like the Blue Mountain Elite and then kill it with the Officer. It is maybe a little bit hopeful, but we'll see what happens. This Werecat's really valuable for our opponents in a long round, so let's just hope that we can also make sure to kill it before it gets too good a value. But yeah, playing that Werecat there is definitely interesting. Maybe our opponents roped out a little bit there. Because just imagine the Werecat value that you can get by using your leader, playing it using your leader on a full row of elves. That is definitely a powerful, powerful card. Right, this is definitely interesting. Okay. I suppose we just play our Blue Mountain Elite and go into a long round. Okay, so we have our Aileron in the deck. We want to make sure that the Aileron does not brick. The Justice is definitely interesting because it will stop our Feign Death commando from going here. I think we'll mulligan this Red Officer and the Aileron for sure. Okay, it was a little bit risky because we could have bricked the Mahakam Volunteers. But pretty much this is a perfect hand, as we can just grab the Eastern Grim with our Aneromancy. And that we haven't even had to use. But yeah, I think what we want to do is potentially play around a Maruda, something like that. We could do it if we end up playing the Feign Death. We then use some of the leader charges to potentially make the chances of Maruna getting the scenario card from her deck a little bit worse. We can definitely spawn maybe even, I don't know if we spawn 2 of them or just 1, kind of let it sit at 50-50, or do we want to at least spawn 1 more? But yeah, this makes the Maruna a little bit worse. The chances of yoinking the 4 here. So I think we do play around that. But yeah, we're in the situation that I also mentioned about the row breaking. This is definitely a little bit stressful for us because we don't want to break our rows by playing like this. So the next elf we play will trigger this, so we'll have a full row of elves almost immediately. We have the option of playing our Elias, I think, or we play just our Dragoon. The Dragoon's not great anyway. I don't want to play too much on the ranged row, so I think I actually play this melee, just move the Conqueror. It's not great, it's 4 provision card in this instance, but yeah, we want to make sure the Yavin fits and the Oak fits on these rows, so we don't want to overbreak that, so to speak. Alright, so we do get a little bit of frost here from our opponent. The Winter Queen is an engine that we can potentially think about removing here. I'm not opposed to that at all, so we might remove it with just Yavin. It seems okay. We can remove it with the Yavin, we can remove it with the Oak. Maybe the Oak here, just because the Yavin would trigger the last chapter of the scenario, and right now we don't have a Death Wish on that. So we can still wait a little bit with that. I don't dislike playing the Oak here, and I'm just thinking about whether to play a leader charge or not. The Oak here does also disrupt the Vernociel's Commando. I'm not really sure what we want to do here. Justice or Oak are both fine options. I think we do this. We get dominance as well, which is quite nice, even though again this Vernociel's Commando unfortunately stops from triggering further. But since we don't have a Death Wish, or not Death Wish, but the Death Blow yet, we don't really want to trigger the scenario either. So we can just kind of buy time and play maybe the Novigradian Justice if there is no good target for our Yavin just yet. And the Vernociel, now as you can see we have so many Elven Deadeyes here, we definitely want to play here on the front row. We can get 1 more Deadeye from the scenario, so that gives us even more value on the Vernociel. So we can wait a little bit before we actually decide to play that. Now you can see in here the Werecat would just be really, really great value for our opponent here. It would be nice to remove this Banshee. So we could remove it, but that means again we don't get the Death Blow on the Yavin. So I think we might just play our Novigradian Justice here and stall a little bit. But getting rid of 1 Consume is not a bad idea. And we definitely have to be a little bit careful here with the row breaking. Definitely Justice is a card that we would like to play way earlier than what we've done now. So, but we'll see. It might be our opponent kills units for us with either just Weather or something like Manticore and Maruna would yoink a unit or steal a unit from our side of the board, which means we might be able to fit everything, but it's definitely going to be a little bit tight here. definitely going to be a little bit tight on our side of the board. Let's see if we can squeeze everyone in or not. Here comes the Naglfar, I assume. Okay. We'll kill a unit, potentially. Okay, not kill a unit. Our opponent knows that we don't have a lot of space, so he's kind of, I think, just planning around this a little bit. Now, I'm not sure if I actually want to trigger this last chapter right now. I am actually not too sure about that. But we can definitely play Teruviel and use the Waylay here to get rid of this. I actually thought that Teruviel was going to hit the Gales here, so that's a bit awkward. But yeah, the scenario is, it damages the enemy units at both ends of a row, so this scenario did not get damaged. Okay, this is a great target for our Yavin to remove here, so I do think we're just going to go ahead and remove this with Yavin. And I think after that, we just play the Renocial for value, and the poor Elias is just going to play for 10 here. He would be pretty mighty otherwise. We'll see. Okay, we get the max value on the Teruviel here, so let's just play it. We are ahead by quite a bit, and just knowing that the Werecat threat is out of the way is definitely nice, but I would be way more comfortable if we would actually have row space here. Okay, another concede by our opponent. Yeah, this is definitely interesting. I think this is a matchup that we should lose if our opponent saves the Werecat. And kind of plays that on a wide row of elves. Yeah. That definitely would have turned out to be a little bit different. And there you can see this is kind of, it's a good this happened, I guess, because it's the point that I'm trying to bring up with be careful with how long the round 3 definitely is going to be. Round 1 was not really winnable for us, I think, so we had to go into the long round. We were very happy that our opponent played that Werecat in round 2, which isn't typically what you should do if you are on the side of the board that plays the Death Wish. You should definitely save that Werecat, because I think we definitely would have lost then. Lost that game potentially even. They just have this huge point swing with the Detlaf and the Werecat, things like that. So you kind of are ahead at first, but then you notice the point gap get a little bit too scary once they play something like Goliath, Werecat, double Detlaf leader charges, and they quickly catch up in terms of points. So as you know, this deck does not have any control options in terms of, we don't have removal other than Oak or Yavin, and some small damages from our bronze core. So what we could do instead is decide if we really want something like Oak that much, and maybe add in Forest Protector. It's just a pretty solid card. It's less provisions, and then we would have the Nature's Rebukes instead of some of the 4 slot cards here. Remove the Blue Mountain Elite, as well as maybe a Saboteur. And then we would kind of have a little bit more control with the 5-point removal, as well as the Forest Protector being a pretty solid point. It's control, and it's it gets the, if you get the Death Blow, it's a 7-point rebuke that you replay. You don't have Treant targets, however, but the control can potentially be valuable for you. So yeah, that is an option that you can choose. You can also choose to potentially try and fit the, instead of these rebukes and the protector, you could try to go for something like Heatwave, try to fit that in. It's just great. It can remove scenarios, it's tall removal, and then again you have 2 slots here for cards that, you know, bronze cards that you do think would fit in to something like this. Let's add maybe the Vanguard, and I mean 6 provision elves aren't that great. Maybe a half-elf hunter, you know, something like that. So those are definitely some, you know, up to you what you prefer. how many provisions you want to spend on the golds and how good you want your bronze core to be. Those would be my recommendations, however. And yeah, I hope you like this video. I will definitely be posting more. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to see what I'm up to outside of YouTube videos, then definitely check out my Twitch, and see you in the next one. Bye!